Good evening, everyone. This weekend is the fourth Sunday of Lent, and it's called Laudate Sunday, which is why we wear the rose-colored vestments every year, fourth Sunday of Lent and the third Sunday of Advent. And this year, in year C, the gospel that we're given is the gospel of the prodigal son. And I don't know if you've ever seen it before, but there's a famous painting of the prodigal son, of this gospel story. It's done by an artist named Rembrandt. I think he was from the Netherlands in the 1500s or the 1600s. And it's an image of the father welcoming his son back. And I would say, if there's one painting that I've seen more than any other painting in confessionals across, the country and across the world, it's that painting. It's the painting of the prodigal son by Rembrandt. That there's a close, obvious connection between this gospel and that great sacrament, the sacrament of confession. And so this evening, since confession clearly goes along with Lent as well, maybe just a brief reflection on what Jesus is teaching us about confession through this gospel. The first thing that he's teaching us is this, that at the moment when the Son is so far from the Father, when he's sort of immersed in sin, and he's forced to eat the scraps that were thrown to the pigs after he's squandered everything that he's been given. In his mind, he is so far from the Father that the Father has nothing to do with him, that the Father is not thinking about him at all, that there's virtually no way to get back into the Father's house, that essentially when we're in the depths of sin, when he's at his worst moment, it must be that the Father is thinking of him not at all. Whereas in actuality, as we see by the way the Father receives him a moment later, that the totality of his concern is for his Son. That even when the Son feels like, based on what he's done, the Father must care about him not at all, in reality, this is the moment when the Father is longing for him the most. And how true is this for you and me? That if we're ever caught up in something that has drawn us far from God, or when we're caught up in something and now it's maybe been a long time since we've gone to confession, or a long time since we got things straight with God, that we've been coming to Mass and we know we should go to confession, or maybe we haven't been to Mass for a long time, or whatever it might be, and we feel like we have to get ourselves fixed first so that we can go back to the Father, that's actually the opposite of the way it really is. That in reality, the way to get fixed, the way to be healed, is by going back to the Father, because he is chiefly concerned for us, thinking about us at that moment when we feel so far from him. That it's at that moment that he's actually totally concerned with us. The second thing to sort of reflect upon is, it's kind of clear from reading this story that it's a really heroic thing for the Son to go back to his Father, to muster up the courage to get up, walk back home, go down that street, and go and confront his Father. And he's even rehearsed what he's going to say. Father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. He's it's such a nerve-wracking thing that, like we all do in those nerve-wracking situations, you thoroughly rehearse what you're going to do and what you're going to say when you get into that situation. And so it's clear to us that this was a huge act of courage for him. And actually, it's a really impressive thing that he does by going back to his Father. And that's the second point of reflection for us, that going into the confessional is a really impressive thing. I think I've shared before that shortly after I became a priest, I started to note sort of how full, I don't know how else to explain it, how full my heart felt after hearing confessions. That going to hear confessions was one of these things that, it's not like I woke up in the morning thinking, yes, I get to go, hear confessions today and sit in the confessional for all this time or whatever. It's not like it was the first thing that I was thinking about and looking forward to doing that day. But that every time when I left the confessional, and this continues to be true, feeling nothing but fulfilled. That this is exactly what the Father, has asked me to do. And this is just a totally good thing and a good place. And I started thinking, why is that? Because when I think about myself going to confession, it usually feels like I'm just in a really bad place, Maybe not every time, but like when I'm going to confession, like I'm kind of at my worst, is what it sometimes feels like. Now, what's the great fear about confession? Father's going to get to hear all the worst things I've ever done, and he's going to see me at my worst. But that's actually not the reality of the confessional. The reality of the confessional is this, that it's the place of greatest courage and humility that I know of. That it's the place where we courageously lift ourselves up, go to the Father, and humbly lay before him everything. And that actually, in the confessional, I'm not at my worst. Maybe I'm recounting some of the moments when I was at my worst, but in the confessional, I'm at my best. That I'm making a tremendous act of humility and a tremendous act of courage. And that the Heavenly Father is meeting me there. That the confessional is not a bad place to be. The confessional is actually one of the best places to be. And the last point of reflection is that, again, it's so clear in the parable. The son's life starts to be lived in the way it's supposed to be after returning to his father. That in a way he could maybe almost kind of maybe try to console himself while he was hanging out with the swine and like eating from the scraps of the food that was thrown to them by saying like, well, this isn't so bad, I've got something to eat, I'm getting by, things are okay. And maybe even after years of living that way, almost getting used to it and being like, well, my life isn't great, but it's a way to get by, it's a way to survive, but it's not at all what he was made for. That he was made to be a son of the Father living in the Father's house. And that when he returns to that, that's where his life really begins again the way it's supposed to be. So too for you and me. Sometimes we can almost get complacent, get used to not going to confession. And be like, well, yeah, my life isn't great. I wouldn't tell anyone that my life is fantastic, or I wouldn't say that things are all, just the way that totally they're supposed to be. But, life's not bad. I can get by. Things are okay. But what if, in fact, I'm only just getting used to living in this way that I'm not at all supposed to be living? This way of just getting by. This way of just living with the swine. This way of just eating the scraps that are thrown to me. But that instead, where am I supposed to be? Living in the loving embrace of the Father. That the full banquet, the full feast that I was made for really starts after going to confession. The Father is waiting for you and me in the confessional. He is lovingly waiting to forgive us of everything and to heal us of all things, to make us perfect so that we can live with him forever.